to this episode of the Listening Detective TV. We've got this series about introverts, and I'm very, very glad to have my dear friend Karen William with us today. So welcome, Karen.
Thank you, Cheryl. Brilliant to be here today.
Fab. So those who don't know, Karen and I have known each other a long time. We both qualified as coaches around the same time, so 2006, 2008. And we've been working alongside each other for the last 12 years now. 14 years, which is like, I just can't believe it's been that long. And at various times we found our own space, haven't we, in the coaching world, and one's been able to help the other and vice versa. So it's been an absolute joy. But you are an introvert, which you're self-professed, and you're quite happy with the label, and you'll quite happily announce you're an introvert. So let's start by just sharing, what does introvert mean to you? Because it's been really interesting listening to, we're now on episode 6, is listening to the other definitions and how other introverts have actually come back to me and said, I like that definition. That makes sense to me. So what's your definition of an introvert?
Gosh, definition of an introvert. Well, thank you for inviting me. Yes, I've been in business for 14 years next month, which is a little bit scary. I've always considered myself an introvert, or at least very shy. Certainly as a child, I was incredibly shy. Introvert to me is somebody who is willing to put themselves out there. So they probably learn strategies to put themselves out there and to be more visible, especially as an entrepreneur. And obviously there's various probably levels of introversion as well. But we have strategies. Certainly for me, I've developed strategies over the years to actually get myself out there in a bigger way, whilst also retaining my introversion. And the thing that it means for me is that if I am delivering a training, delivering an interview or something like that, I need time to recharge my energy. And I recharge my energy by being by myself rather than being with people. For me, that's kind of the distinction that I make now that makes me think I'm still an introvert, even though somebody challenged me on that on Friday. He said, I didn't think you were an introvert. And then we talked about disc profiling, which is something I did back in the day when I was in corporate. And when I told him my disc profile, he was very surprised. So, yeah.
So it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because there's this distinction between what other people perceive it to be, and what I'm hearing you would say you're shy. Whereas I think there's lots of people where they're introvert get frustrated that their introvert behavior is interpreted and inferred to be shy or lacking confidence. So it brings us on to, because I think there's so many components to this, but the defining one is the energy. So you said, when you're on your own, that's how you get your energy. So let's this being called shy, what's the impact, of being called an introvert or shy? Have you ever had it where somebody sort of called you on your introvert behavior and it's had a real negative impact on you in terms of the way that you show up?
I can think of many times in my life where that's happened. I think, as a child, I was incredibly shy, really, really shy. I remember I did tap dancing once, and my teacher shouted at me and I ran out of the room crying, and I never went back ever again. In work, obviously, we all go through those experiences, and one particular experience, which I know you know about, Cheryl, it's one of the turning points, one of those sliding doors moments in my life, when I was doing pretty well in a job. I was in meetings, but being a shy person, being a reflector, often people would say what I wanted to say before I did, because maybe they would speak up more, maybe they were more extroverted. And I remember my boss saying just a throwaway comment one day. She said, "Karen, I wish you'd speak out more." And it was just a throwaway comment, but it really kind of sat with me, and it really made me sit up and think. Now, I have no animosity against that comment, because it made me do something about it. So I decided at that time to get myself a coach, and to basically it transformed my life just from that one comment. But I still remember it. The person who said it doesn't remember it, but it still sits with me now.
So when it sits with you, what kind of sits with you is that? What was the impact?
The impact is very positive, because it made me just say, I'm going to bloody well show you. And that was kind of the impact it had, because I think I realized somebody was verbalizing something, something that I knew already. So someone was verbalizing it, and someone being bold enough to actually share that with me was kind of had a really big impact. There was obviously that moment of sort of like, oh, do I need to change? Do I need to be different? But they also helped me to embrace my strengths. Many years before that, I'd got into sort of profiling tools, disc profiling, emotional intelligence. So I was always intrigued on strengths, weaknesses, development areas, and things like that anyway. And I'd been reading about the coaching world for many years prior. So I was kind of in that self-development bubble, and I knew I could do something about it. So I chose I could have easily chosen to not do anything about it, but I just chose to take the leap and set up my own business instead.
Fabulous. And it's something that's come out a lot then, and a lot of the introverts been talking to is it does feel like it's an extrovert's priority world, and introverts are sort of asked to become extroverted. So it's really great that actually for you, what it is you wanted a voice, and it was the catalyst for you to find your way to do that.
Yeah.
Because I do think for some people it can actually be the complete opposite. It knocks their confidence and stops them from feeling it's okay to be them. And I will just say, any extroverts that are watching this, it has told another introvert they need to speak up more. Don't forget, you need to shut up. If you're expecting somebody else to speak, you have to allow space for it. And I think one of the big things I'm getting from these interviews is that, and I think I've said it in one of the other interviews before, so those that are watching a series of it, I do apologize for repeating, but I think it's worth mentioning again, is that we often criticize or get impatient or intolerant with someone who's taking some time to come up with an answer. And I know in preparation for today, you really wanted the questions up front, because as an internal processor, an introvert, you want to get your answers clear in your head before you have to answer them. And in society, generally, people aren't very tolerant, are they, for the pause, the processing time. But I just want to put out there again for the extroverts, just notice that some of us talk quite a lot very quickly, but we don't get to the answer for just as long. If anything, we can take longer in our nattering moments before we actually get to the answer. And I think I think it's the patience, whether it's you're listening to an extrovert who's taking a while to get to the point, or whether it's an introvert who's doing it all inside and you're like, oh, what's going on in there? I want to know what they're thinking. I know there's been many times in our partnership when you said, oh, I need time to reflect. And I get all like, oh, I just want to know now. And I mean that with love and kindness. It's because I get excited and want to hear what you're thinking. But I have to learn patience and wait for that magical stuff to come out. So that interview then, well, that comment was a catalyst for you to, what it sounds like is something you're already inquiring about, something you're already curious about, emotional intelligence, personal development. So what is it that's really worked about your introverted, I was going to say persona, behavior, but those as an attribute, as your qualities of who you are? What works about being an introvert for you?
I might go on to that in a second, but I think what's worked for me in the entrepreneurial world is I've had to push myself. As you know, I wrote the book The Mouse That Rules, which is my own personal story. And it was only when I started writing that book in 2015 that I really, well, probably earlier than that, probably about 2013, that I started it. It was a long process that I started to realize I had a story. And I look at my entrepreneurial journey. So the comment that my boss made to me was in 2006. Obviously now we're almost 15 years later, because it was in the January. So in that time, I have used my introversion to really just push myself. So I've done all sorts of things to stretch my comfort zone. And, we've all got this comfort zone. We've got a place where we feel safe, where we feel secure. But actually, if you don't go into your stretch zone every now and then, you're never going to achieve some of the things you might want to achieve. And none of us want to get to 70, 80 years old and look back on our lives with regret. So for me, I've always, focused on, okay, so what can I do to stretch? Not panic zone. That's not what I want. And occasionally we all go in the panic zone. But what can I do to stretch it? And I suppose over the years, my comfort zone has stretched. So I have been that courageous entrepreneur. And that boss is a good friend of my mum's. And every so often she sees what I'm doing. And she's very surprised to see the kind of the butterfly that's almost emerged, So it's amazing what has changed. I would still call myself an introvert because of the fact I do recharge my energy, as I said earlier, through being by myself. But I've learned to, and I think one of the misconceptions, and I think you've covered it before, about introversion is that an introvert is not confident. I am confident. I am confident in my own stuff. So doing an interview about my story, about my journey, about books, anything like that, I can deliver it without thinking. But if you ask me to talk about, how to doing something that I'm not familiar with or I'm not comfortable with, that would send me straight into that panic zone.
Yeah. And so, and I wonder whether there's a misunderstanding and a difference between somebody who processes internally and someone who's an introvert. And they're two words that I think you and I have played with for some time, because we both know that when we're in overwhelm and we're in the panic zone, we're both verbal processors. So we have to externalize it in order to get clarity, in order to offload it, to make sense of it. And it tends to come out quite fast when we're in that sort of space. So I think there is a difference between somebody who needs a bit more time to process to get the answer. There's a bit more between somebody who will talk it out till they get to the answer. And this other thing about this energy is that being with people's great, and you need your alone time. Having worked alongside it, I think one of the things I would say that really works about it is because you are an internal processor, and when you have clarity of what you're doing, you've got confidence in the process, and you're okay with your own company, is that when you decide you're going to do something, you just get off and do it. Whereas I want some, I don't necessarily need to talk about, but I'm realizing now is that I thought I was, I am an external processor, so I talk to think, to work it out. But I was so dependent on being with people. I didn't ever have any model of how I could do it on my own. And it's been working alongside you that's made me go, oh, actually, I actually quite like being on my own, but I have to know what I'm doing. That's the crux. It's where the confidence in the actual process. Once I've got clarity, I can work on my own fine. But I know with you, that's what I've seen. So I just want to rewind, because I'm thinking that there was something you said about if it's outside your comfort zone, it's not familiar. I think that's also something that people need to bear in mind, whether introverts, whether you put the label of introvert or not, it's people giving people time to process a question. You know, whether we're just talking a minute or overnight, is there seems to be some kind of, we're too short of time, you should know this. And actually I think that if we all reflected on our own behaviors, unless it's something we've done, like, our work or our models, our books that are really familiar to us, most questions, if you ask somebody something they haven't thought about before, they'll either give you a non-thought out answer, or they'll need time to think about it. And I just wonder if that's the key, is actually have more patience with people just generally when you're asking them questions they haven't had time to think about before. So what's been, I'm trying to think what else we're going to talk about now. I've lost my track now.
That's fine. I can jump in, Cheryl. You know me well enough.
You can fill the space, because I'm sure you remember what we were going to talk about. So carry on.
I was just going to say, there's so many facets of a personality in someone's behaviour, isn't there? There's so many facets in terms of, if you think about all of the different profiling tools out there, and sort of wealth dynamics, DISC, emotional intelligence. And I was on a networking event this morning, and I came across another one that I've not heard of. There are so many facets, and it's just remembering we're all different. But we can evolve and we can change if we want to work on something. And certainly back in those early days when I was running my business, I knew that I needed to work on my confidence. I vividly remember the first training. First, I went to a coaching group to deliver a workshop, a kind of just a probably half-hour, 1 hour talk. So I drove an hour up the road. It was dark. It was winter. It was not a nice evening, and it was quite stressful. And stressful in terms of getting there, and stressful in terms of it was the first time I delivered anything like that. I had my PowerPoint. I had my notes. I knew exactly what I wanted to say. I would flush, because I have a tendency of doing that if I'm stressed about something. But you know what? That was just the first of many. I've probably done hundreds over the years now. And now, I don't need my notes. Now I don't need my PowerPoint. I can just deliver it, because I've got so used to it now. And I think you have to do things once sometimes to be able to do them again, to feel comfortable in doing them. So that's just one learning I've had about myself. And yes, I am an internal thinker. I don't think every introvert, is every introvert internal processor, I'm not sure, but certainly yes, you think I can make quick decisions, but I've probably been thinking about it, walking about it, and thinking about it, and it's probably been in the back of my mind for years, but because I don't externalize it, you go, where did that come from?
And just so you know, everybody, I know she doesn't make quick decisions. I just know that she keeps it a secret, and it suddenly comes out, and then I have a business partner with her. You have to suddenly like, oh, we're going somewhere else now, I've got to do this. But equally, we've had to learn as business partners, haven't we, that I'll come up with something and I think, once you're on your track, once you have worked out what you want to do, and we're both very similar like this, once we know where we're going, if one of us come up with another idea, it's like, oh, I've got to be pulled over that way. It is like reconfiguring yourself, isn't it? It's like, and that's when you will say to me, actually, I need to sit with that for a bit. I need to let that. And I do value you from that point of view, that you will take the time to make a decision, whereas I tend to be more reactive and then reflect on it and go, oh, I think I could have learned from that there. So one of the questions I've been asking people is, as an introvert, when you you haven't got your script, it's not something you've done loads and loads of times. And I think that we are bordering on the difference between needing time to formulate your answer and formulate what you want to do about something is where, and I think that's where there is some misconstrued between internal processes and an introvert. But when you are, flush and you don't know the answer to it, what's the best thing that somebody could do for you in order to support you to get to that place where you can respond with an answer? What would be the best thing for them to say or do in that moment?
I think in any situation like that, people want you to succeed. There's very few people who want you to fail. So it's just remembering, if you're in that situation, is that people around you want you to succeed. They empathize with you. Okay, not everybody, that might be a generalization, but for most people, if you're delivering a session on Zoom or a session in person, people want you to succeed. So just remember that. So if I was having a conversation with myself, which was probably back in this is probably about 2012, 2013, if I was having a conversation with myself back then, I would go, hey, it's fine, because everyone wants you to succeed.
So that's the conversation you have for yourself. But what I'm thinking in terms of support, because I think when you get like bosses that say, I wish you'd speak up more, it could go either way with that. That's feedback, isn't it, at the end of the day, where they go, oh, hurry up, come up with an answer. So I'm just thinking what I'd like to collect, and if not now, I'll get it as a comment underneath the video, but is that, because I don't think I gave Karen this question before we came online, and I'm just throwing at her. So just so we're going to see what happens now. Is that you're not going to play the game? But it is, if you and I were in partnership, and I kind of know because we've been doing it a while, and I throw something at you that's like a curveball, you weren't expecting it, it's a question you haven't thought about. Maybe do the other way first. What's the worst thing I can do? If I've asked you a question that you've flushed and you don't know the answer, what's the worst thing that I could do in terms of supporting you to get the answer?
The worst thing would be to expect an answer straight away. I think and not give me time to process it and time to think. That would be the worst thing that somebody could do in that situation.
So therefore, on the other side of that question, then, so the best thing, I'm making the assumption or inferring, the best thing people could do is give you the time to actually think.
Partly the time, but how I was actually thinking about a session I did with a client yesterday. Sometimes it's holding up a mirror to the other person and just allowing them to speak. And just so I was with a client recently, and she was trying to make sense of something. So for me, sometimes it's just holding up a mirror, allowing people to speak, allowing people to say what they want to say, and then you can almost hold up a mirror, and very much like clean language, which I know you're brilliant at, Cheryl, in terms of using their language, reflect back to them what they've said, clarify, maybe some of the points, because sometimes people, I think in a coaching relationship as well, is that we say things to our partners and our friends, they don't necessarily get it, but we say things to another coach, and we've been trained to support people in that way. So whereas a partner might say, oh, pull your socks up, or you're fine, or you're brilliant, or something like that, actually when you're in a coaching relationship, you're giving that, a good coach gives people the time and space just to be able to go and spew everything out. So I think for me, that's, as a coach, one thing I've learned over the years, and I don't know if this answers your question or whether I'm going off at a tangent now, but the best thing is for space, but also for someone to hold a mirror up and just be able to reflect back what's been said.
I think you gave a very good example of what you were talking about, that if someone asks you a question they don't know, just let them go blah, 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 and it goes out, because it's a great example, and that's not in any judgment. There's a really beautiful example of it happening. And I guess what story I was making up before I asked the question was that generally my assumptions or my experience of an introvert or an internal process, when you ask them a question they don't know the answer to, they will be in silence. So as a coach, as a family member, you have nothing to reflect back. And I often hear that with people, well, I don't know what's going on in their head, so I don't know how to help. And the frustration can come because people aren't saying anything. Now, I think that's where you are different. I think when you've got stuff, you're quite happy to verbalize what's not working and get it out. So at least somebody's got some stuff to work with.
But it also requires the coach or the person who's with that person to ask the right questions as well. So the silence is great, but it's asking the questions that's going to get the person to open up and actually feel like they can talk without judgment, without being criticized, without being put down and things like that. So it's asking those right questions.
That is really valid points, isn't it? If you are going to sort of coerce or cajole or encourage somebody to speak, you're going to have to be able to hold that space without saying, oh, well, that's not right, or you need to, you're not correcting what they've got to say.
Yeah.
But I will share as well, because and I know you won't mind me doing it, because we've worked together in the clarity retreats before. And one of the things I know that as a business partner, I have to learn to be patient and wait for the answers to evolve, because you will go off on your own and you can work it all out in your head while you're writing it, and it's all silent. And then so I just want to sort of say to you is that I think what I've gained from today, and I really thank you for that, is that there's more differential between the internal processor and an introvert. So the introvert is more about where you get your energy from, and if you spend a lot of time with people, you need to have more alone time. But there's definitely something around this, giving people time to process, and that not all, and that's a question we ought to put out there: are all introverts internal processors? There's a question for us to find out. We'll go and do a bit of exploring on that. Now, I know you've got some great stuff going up, because one of the things that you do, those who don't know, is Karen is the book mentor. She's also, so she's written, the book is The Hook. She's got Book Marketing Made Simple, gone the wrong side. And she got the Rocket Up My Bomb to make sure I got my one out as well. So this is the wonderful lady who's been cajoling and encouraging me not to give up on my book writing dreams. And it's a great way for introverts, isn't it, to find their voice. I mean, book writing, I have to say, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, internal processor, external processor, the book writing journey, I've been with you on that journey with the authors. It's a great way for either I don't know whether to call them personas or behaviors or attributes or qualities about people. It's a great way to find your voice. The external processors have to learn to say less and condense it down. So I might start with 250,000 words and get down to 35,000 if I'm lucky. And people like yourself learn to find that, that their vocabulary, and to, once you've written it, I think that's one of the great things, is you become more confident when you get asked questions, because the process of writing embeds it. So tell me, I know you've got a special offer and you've got some stuff going on for authors at the moment. So what would you like people to know that are watching this video when it comes to introverts and their authorship? What's on offer?
Gosh, where do I start? I find for, a lot of my clients are introverts, a lot of my clients are extroverts. And I think the thing is that they have a passion, they have a purpose, they have a voice, they want to say something. So obviously, if you're an introvert and you want to write a book, it's a really great tool to get out there, because you can, you can sit down, write it by yourself. But what I do encourage all clients to do is actually self-validate and self-fund their book as they write it. So they actually do their research and they start raising their profile as they write it, which I know can feel quite scary for many people. So I support people through the whole process from, hey, I want to write a book, I've got an idea. Is it good enough? Is it the right thing to write about? Through to having a final manuscript that they're proud of, and every step on the way. And I think particularly for, actually, I don't think it really matters if you're an introvert or an extrovert. I think so many people on the journey go through that, have I got something to say? Is this the right subject? And they want support. When lockdown COVID hit in March, one of the first things I did is put my one-to-one program online, and I created the Smart Author System. I do have an offer the week after next for anybody who's interested. And basically, it's a 6-week program that takes you through the whole process of writing a book. Now, I don't expect people to write a book in 6 weeks, but it takes you through all of the questions you might have. And, I launched it with a colleague of mine at the end of April, and we've got some amazing people get some amazing results so far. We've had 2 books published, one who's in the final editing stage, because they've learned through the process. And what I wanted to do is make sure it wasn't just people doing a home study course, because they get access to me through SOS calls, one-to-ones, and also Make It Happen Day as well. But ultimately, it just takes people through the whole process of, hey, I want to write a book, to having that book that builds their business that they're proud of.
Yeah.
Already had a client recently who went through the program, and she launches her book next week, and she's already got a client off the back of it, and just through the publicity that she's gained from really, really putting it out there as she launches it.
It's a really good example there, because like you said, you've got the key components over that 6-week course, and they won't necessarily write it in 6 weeks, but there is something in there about what we've just talked about, with you and your introvert journey, is that once you've done it and you know what you've got to do, it becomes easier. So actually going on this 6-week course, even if it takes them 18 months to write the book, because they already know the process, that it boosts confidence. You already know when it might get sticky. They know when things may not go. So they'll go, oh, I'm in that bit. That's why I'm holding myself back. So that's what Karen said would happen. We're going to be there. And there's just something magical about knowing what to expect from the process, the highs and the lows, so that when you get there, you don't stay stuck. You like you say, I like the sound of SOS calls. That's something new that's come in since we spoke last. So
it is.
Thank you very much. And that brings us to say thank you very much for being on this series. It's been really interesting. And you've definitely left me with the question, are all introverts internal processors? And maybe we have to go out and find out that question. So please comment below. Tell us what you think about today. What's your thoughts on, are all introverts internal processors? Or are you somebody that likes to be away from people in order to get energy, but in order to think you need to talk? Look forward to hearing from you in the next episode.